Okay, back to Daniel chapter 3, and this video should end the whole thing. So the last time, um, verses 13 to 23, Nebuchadnezzar went into a rage, and he gave the command to throw the three Hebrew boys into the fire. And he basically said, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you will not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up?" So he got real mad. And the folly of pride, when you pit yourself against the eternal God, you have met your match. And he meets his match in this chapter and in the next one, as we shall see. It seems like he had forgotten that Daniel's God was greater than the gods of Babylon. That was in chapter 2. So here he is, really ticked off at him, orders them thrown in, and they basically are telling him, "We will not bow." John Calvin states, "When our danger for the truth's sake is imminent, we should learn to place our life in God's hand, and then bravely and fearlessly devote ourselves to death, for God's glory ought to be more precious to us than our human lives." Hence, we cannot be witnesses for God without we lay aside all desire for this life, and at least prefer God's glory to it. Meanwhile, we must remark the impossibility of doing this without the hope of a better life drawing us towards itself. For where there is no promise of any eternal inheritance implanted in our hearts, we shall never be torn away from this world. When we understand our inheritance to be in heaven, while we are strangers upon earth, then we put off that clinging to the life of this world, to which we are too much devoted. So, this is a refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to worship the image. And it's one of several examples within Scripture where God sanctions disobedience of an authority. Great care is needed in interpreting and applying these scriptural examples of disobedience to our own lives. So civil disobedience is what they were taking part in. They were appealing to their own sense of justice. The issue on public agendas right out in the open, so everybody saw it. And in essence, they were trying to draw attention to the unjust worshiping of an idol. And the expression, his face was changed. We talked about that last time. He basically lost controls. He made faces at them, or he got, his face got so squinched up. He is so thwarted in his prideful effort to have everybody worship him, he just literally engaged, and he starts making faces at them. And it might have been something like that. So verse 20, "And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So there he is in a rage, tells them to throw them into the fire, and that's where they went. And the soldiers that threw them in all burned to death. And they were just following orders. Here they were on the outside burned up, and they were on the inside having, a great time. And we notice too how poor leadership always causes problems for those under that leadership's authority. And This verse in Isaiah applies to their situation. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, for I am the Lord your God. So they knew they were not going to be able to escape the experience, but they were trusting God to suffer through the experience to His glory. So, what's next? Well, here we go. Verses 24 and 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said, "O king, true, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So, now you think Nebuchadnezzar was shook up when he started. Now he is really shook. He is seated at a comfortable distance, able to see through the opening, and he's able to see what's going on. He looks in there and he has a big surprise. First he sees 4, not 3. Then he sees that they are not bound, but they are loose. They are not lying down, they're walking around. They're not burning up and roasting. They're completely unhurt. It was cool in the furnace. So he sees a quartet, and they might have been singing. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. They weren't looking for the exit. They were just patiently waiting and enjoying each other's company. Now that's amazing. And you might wonder, well, who is that phrase, a son of the gods? Well, Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan. He wouldn't have known the Son of God if he had seen him. He wouldn't have understood a pre-incarnate Christophany or appearance of Christ such as we find in Genesis 18. So you have that, there's theophanies and then there are Christophanies. I believe that what Nebuchadnezzar had in his mind with that statement is simply an angelic being, because over in verse 28 in this same chapter, he uses the word angel. And it seems to me that Nebuchadnezzar recognized a supernatural spiritual being that he would equate with an angel. So the question is, well, who is it? Well, Nebuchadnezzar definitely understood the being as godlike. The heart of paganism is just like that, just as Satan addressed Eve in the garden. Socrates confirms this is a leading pagan philosopher. The end of life is to be like God, and the soul following God will be like him. So that's a very pagan understanding. So it is men like gods. Now, several commentators indicate the Aramaic word can only be plural and should therefore be rendered as gods. It appears the Aramaic is saying the individual appeared godlike from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, like a son of the gods, like that of a god, like a divine being. So, supernatural beings, deity, divinity, God, immortal. And any supernatural being worshipped as controlling some part of the world. There you have it. Now, in favor of identifying the individual as an angel is Nebuchadnezzar's statement in verse 28, where he refers to the individual as an angel, and the numerous passages in the Old Testament where angels are referred to as sons of God. Also supporting this identification is the subsequent delivery of Daniel in the lion's den, which is said to be an angel. There it is, Daniel 6:22. My own God sent his angel and shut the mouth of the lions. On the other hand, some passages in the Old Testament refer to a unique individual as God's son, singular, who appears to differ from the angels. Many Christian commentators take this individual to be one and the same as the angel of the Lord, the mysterious figure who speaks in the first person for God and even receives worship. And that can be seen in, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Hosea. So although it is beyond the scope of our treatment to expound on this topic at length, many believe this special angel was a pre-incarnate representation of the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. In any event, it seems as if Nebuchadnezzar merely saw the individual as being godlike, terminology that could also describe an angel. But remember this, Psalm 121, Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil, and he shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. So these strong promises to preserve Israel emphasizes God's intention to support his chosen nation. The promises also imply history will be characterized by repeated attempts to displace Israel from the plan of God. Why else would such strong declarations be necessary? Israel's history amply illustrates the need for these promises by God. Of 10 measures of suffering sent by God upon the world, 9 fell on Jerusalem. Many events in Jewish history are too terrible to be believed, but nothing in Jewish history is too terrible to have happened. So the Jews have endured unending persecution, often simply being Jews. But Charles Feinberg states about this section, no nation under heaven could touch Israel for ill without bringing down upon them the wrath of Almighty God. The pages of history are strewn with the wreckage of nations, who, though great in the eternal councils of the world, incurred the just wrath of an outraged God. While God reserved the right to judge his chosen people for their sins, he also reserves the right to judge those who spitefully treat the Jews and thus bring reproach on the one who made an everlasting covenant with Israel. And I think Feinberg understood that. He was Jewish himself. Verse 26, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. So now he's changing his tune. Come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come on them. So, kind of like they were just having a morning stroll. So they gave them this, the full investigation. There's not a hair singed. Garments are fine. Nothing being burned at all, and there's not even a smell of fire. So in verse 26, he says the Most High God. He is not abandoning his polytheism. He's just sticking this God on top of the pile, that's all. He's not saying the one true God. He's just saying you got to be the supreme one, that's all. He is maintaining his traditional polytheism. Now verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship a God except their own. That's just cool. So they said, he said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Many people might say, the conversion of Nebuchadnezzar. But no, that's probably not right. He is simply acknowledging what theologians call henotheism. And that is the belief that certain people in certain nations have their own gods. And in a henotheistic way, he has room in his polytheism for the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he is willing to say at this point that this is the Most High God of all the gods. He's the one on top. And I love his statement in verse 28. They yielded their bodies. What verse does that sound like? Well, we can go back to Romans 12. Therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So we can turn the pagan world around in a tizzy, literally, by living an uncompromising life, so that even in their unbelief, they will have to say that ours is the Most High God. Even in their unbelief, they will have to say, blessed be the God of those people. Any God who can draw that kind of allegiance must be true. And then again in Romans, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Then verse 29. Here comes Nebuchadnezzar again. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in the fire. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they're getting promoted again. So if you think the Chaldeans were unhappy at the beginning, you can imagine what they felt like at the end of chapter 3. He says anybody who speaks a word against their God is going to be cut to pieces. Their houses will be made, and that literally means a refuse heap. So this is ancient cancel culture. Anybody who speaks a word against their God is going to be just wasted. Now, Nebuchadnezzar isn't dumb. He's determined that he's going to be nice to this God, because if ever he wanted anything, he wants this God on his side. And there you see kind of the pantheon of all of their many gods. Churchill said, fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. So if Nebuchadnezzar was convinced of the superiority of the God of the Hebrews, who had rescued them, his decree stopped short of acknowledging him as the one true God. It still leaves room for the polytheism. He's not ready for monotheism. And they received his blessing, and their position was made easier and their work more successful in spite of the opposition of those that begrudged them their success. Nebuchadnezzar approved their faith in Yahweh. So he said, just keep on doing it. Who had demonstrated himself to be as powerful as his three faithful followers had claimed that he was. Now, chapter 3 shows that Yahweh is powerful enough to control history miraculously. He does so to remain true to his promises to his people. So you got to remember that. He has many promises for Israel, and not all of those have been completed yet. And to deliver those who put their trust in him. He can reveal the future but he can also bring it into existence. So the witness to Yahweh's superior power was the most powerful human being of his day, King Nebuchadnezzar. Thus, there should be no question about God's greatness. And that's chapter 3.